Move away from him. Right now. Nathan Cross said it quietly, almost gently, and the armed guard obeyed without a single question asked. That was the moment the murder was already in motion. Camera disabled. Window open. Rifle trained. And Adrian Moretti stood on that balcony with a glass of bourbon in his hand, completely trusting the man who had just cleared the path for his assassination. 300 guests below. Dozens of bodyguards throughout the estate. And the only person who saw what was happening, the only person who moved to stop it, was the maid that everyone had spent 3 months treating like furniture. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night of the charity reception, Elena Parker carried a silver tray through a crowd of 300 people, and not one of them looked at her face. That was fine. Elena had stopped expecting it. She moved through the great hall of the Moretti estate the way water moves through stone, quietly, consistently, without interruption. She refilled glasses that wealthy hands extended without turning toward her. She collected empty plates from men in $1,000 suits who spoke freely in front of her about money, about leverage, about names she recognized from newspaper headlines. They spoke freely because they had already decided she wasn't listening. Or if she was, that it didn't matter. Elena Parker was the help, the newest maid, the woman who had been assigned the worst shifts, the coldest corridors, the trays too heavy for anyone else to carry gracefully. She had been working inside the Moretti estate for nearly 3 months, and in 3 months, she had learned something that surprised even her. The more invisible a person is, the more clearly they can see. The estate itself was the kind of place that didn't apologize for what it was. Marble floors that rang under her shoes, crystal chandeliers that split the light into 100 pale colors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, where the water moved black and restless beneath the November sky. The guests came dressed in their best, their jewelry catching the light, their laughter filling the high ceiling rooms, with a sound that was warm on the surface and hollow underneath. This was a charity reception. For the Children's Hospital Fund. For the Community Rebuilding Initiative. For something with a name that looked beautiful on an invitation. But Elena had been inside enough rooms to know that when powerful people gathered in the same place at the same time, the charity was rarely the reason. She carried her tray toward the east corridor and tried not to think about how her feet ached. It was senior staff coordinator Helen who had assigned Elena to balcony service that night, which was the assignment no one else wanted. The balcony overlooked the main lawn, and in November, the cold came off the lake like something with intention. But Elena didn't complain. Complaining was for people who had options, and Elena, at this particular moment in her life, had made a decision to take what was given to her and turn it into something useful. She pushed through the service door and stepped out onto the balcony. Adrian Moretti was already there. She had seen him before. Of course, everyone in Chicago had seen Adrian Moretti in newspaper photographs, in local television segments, at the kinds of events where cameras were strategically allowed. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a face that had learned to be unreadable in public. He ran the most powerful private shipping and logistics company in the Midwest. He also ran, depending on who you asked and whether they trusted you enough to tell the truth, a significant portion of what moved through Chicago's ports without appearing on any official manifest. He was not the kind of man who had ever noticed Elena Parker. He stood at the railing of the balcony, looking out over the lawn, a glass of bourbon held loosely at his side. His security chief, Nathan Cross, stood 3 feet behind him, close enough to be visible, far enough to seem respectful. 2 other guards flanked the balcony door. Elena stepped out quietly, began collecting the empty glasses left on the small outdoor tables, and made herself as unobtrusive as possible. That was when she noticed the first thing. The security camera mounted at the corner of the balcony, the one that had been aimed toward the driveway when she'd checked it 2 hours ago during setup, was now pointing at the stone wall. Someone had turned it. It wasn't broken. It wasn't malfunctioning. It had been physically rotated so that the lens faced blank stone. Elena set down her tray carefully and looked at it again. Deliberate. Definitely deliberate. She told herself it might be nothing. A camera adjustment during setup. An angle change for the event. She kept working. Nathan Cross pulled out his phone and typed something. Then he stepped close to one of the balcony guards and spoke quietly into the man's ear. The guard nodded, straightened, and walked back inside through the service door without a word. One guard gone. Elena moved to the far end of the balcony, collecting glasses, watching without appearing to watch. Adrian turned and said something to Nathan. Nathan laughed at whatever it was. The laugh was easy, practiced. The laugh of a man who had been performing friendship for so long he'd stopped noticing the performance. Elena looked up at the main house. The third-floor window on the north corner was open. She stopped. The temperature outside was 34 degrees. There was a north wind coming off the lake that had been brutal all evening. Every window in the estate had been closed before the guests arrived. Elena knew this because she had been part of the team that walked the perimeter 2 hours before the event began. She had personally noted the closed windows because the setup coordinator had emphasized that the heating system required sealed rooms to maintain the reception temperature. That window was open now. Her mind began pulling threads together before she consciously told it to. Camera turned away from the balcony. Guard quietly removed from Adrian's side. Window open on the north face of the house, which looked directly toward the tree line beyond the lawn. She turned and looked at the trees. Tall oaks 40 yards from the estate wall. The lawn lights didn't reach them. Beyond the ornamental hedges, the darkness was complete. She almost talked herself out of it. Almost, it was the sound that decided her. Or rather, the absence of sound. Birds had been moving in those trees all evening. She'd noticed them during setup, starlings settling into the upper branches, restless in the cold. Now they were silent, all of them, at once. Something had moved in those trees that was large enough and still enough to make every bird go quiet. Elena put her tray down on a table. She looked at the trees. She looked at the open window. She looked at Nathan Cross standing behind Adrian Moretti with his phone in his hand. And then she saw it just for a fraction of a second because the cloud cover shifted and the moonlight caught it at an angle and it moved, barely, just a slight repositioning or reflection in the darkness between two oak trees. Small, circular. The kind of reflection that glass makes when it catches light from an unexpected direction. The scope of a rifle. Elena didn't think. That was the honest truth of what happened next. She did not stand there and run calculations. Her body had already made the decision before her conscious mind finished understanding what she'd seen, and what her body decided was to move. She crossed the balcony in 4 steps. She shouted. Adrian turned toward the sound of her voice with the expression of a man who has never in his adult life been shouted at by a maid, a mix of startlement and irritation that lasted exactly as long as it took Elena to reach him. She hit him with her full body weight, driving him sideways and down behind the stone railing, and the suppressed shot struck the balcony railing 3 inches above where Adrian Moretti's head had been. The sound wasn't loud. That was the thing people who hadn't been near suppressed fire never understood. It wasn't the explosive crack you heard in movies. It was a sharp, tight sound, almost polite, and then the spray of stone chips from the railing, and the high-pitched zing of fragments, and the very concrete evidence of what had nearly happened. Elena pressed Adrian flat against the balcony floor, staying low herself, her hand on his shoulder to keep him down. "Don't move," she said. "Stay below the railing." Above them, Nathan Cross was shouting. The 2 remaining guards were shouting. Inside the estate, the sound of the shot, suppressed or not, had reached enough ears that the panic was beginning, the elegant crowd starting to compress toward the exits, voices rising, glass breaking somewhere.
What the Adrian started.
"There's a sniper in the tree line," Elena said. She wasn't whispering. Whispering was for people who had time. 40 yards out, north side between the second and third large oak from the left. "You need to get off this balcony right now." Not through the main doors. Through the service entrance on the east side. Adrian stared at her. Up close, his eyes were dark brown, and in them she could see something she hadn't expected from a man like him. He was genuinely frightened, and he was trying very hard not to show it, and he was also, she could tell, already starting to think. "Who are you?" he said. "Elena Parker," she said. "I clean your bathrooms. Can we move now?" Was suddenly crouching beside them, his hand on Adrian's arm. "Sir, we need to get you inside." "Not through the main doors," Elena said sharply. She looked at Nathan directly for the first time. "The main entrance is where the panic is. You'll be exposed crossing the foyer. The service entrance on the east side leads to the kitchen corridor and down to the basement loading area. It's enclosed the whole way. That's where we go." Nathan's eyes met hers, and for just one moment, just a fraction of a second that she would think about later, much later, turning it over and over in her memory, his expression wasn't frightened. It was calculating. Then it shifted, and he looked like every other person on that balcony, alarmed, uncertain, reactive. "She's right," Adrian said. "Already moving. Take us through the service entrance." Elena led them. She had spent 3 months learning every corridor in that estate, every door, every shortcut and dead end and forgotten passage, because that was what the job required, and because Elena Parker had always believed that the most important knowledge was the kind that no one thought worth having. She knew which service door stuck in cold weather and which one had been quietly rehinged 3 weeks ago. She knew which stretch of corridor had a squeaking board that could give away your position in a quiet house. She knew exactly how many steps it was from the balcony service door to the kitchen entrance, because she had walked it so many times that her feet knew the number before her mind did. She took Adrian and Nathan and the 2 guards through a route that added 40 seconds to the journey and kept them away from every exterior-facing window. They made it to the basement loading area without incident, the heavy steel door locked behind them. The loading dock was cold and fluorescent and smelled of industrial cleaner and cardboard, and Adrian Moretti stood in the middle of it in his $3,000 suit and looked at Elena with an expression she had never seen on his face in any photograph. He looked at her the way you look at someone you are genuinely seeing for the first time. "You knew that route," he said. It wasn't a question. "I work here," Elena said simply. "You knew the service entrance was safer. I knew the main foyer would be full of panicked people and exposed sightlines. And I knew the service entrance was enclosed." She paused. "And I knew the camera on the balcony had been turned." The room went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of people agreeing. The sharp, loaded quiet of people understanding that something important had just been said. Nathan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The security camera at the north corner of the balcony," Elena said. She kept her voice even, because she had already decided she wasn't going to be intimidated, not now, not after what she'd just seen. "It was aimed at the driveway during setup. When I came out for balcony service, it had been rotated to face the wall. The lens was pointing at blank stone. Whatever happened on that balcony tonight wasn't going to be recorded." Nathan opened his mouth. Adrian held up one hand and Nathan closed it. "How long had it been turned?" Adrian asked. "I don't know exactly," Elena said. "I noticed it when I came on at 9 o'clock. Setup ended at 7:30. Somewhere in that 90-minute window." Adrian nodded slowly. He was looking at Nathan, but his face gave nothing away. That, Elena thought, was the face of a man who had survived this long by learning to process dangerous information without showing that it had landed. "Get the estate locked down," Adrian said. "No one leaves. I want every entrance covered and I want a full security review before anyone goes anywhere." He paused. "And I want Miss Parker in the main study in 30 minutes. Nathan started to object. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the slight forward press of his shoulder, and then he stopped and nodded and said, "Yes, sir." Elena watched him walk away, and she thought he sent that guard away right before the shot. She thought he was standing behind Adrian, not beside him. She thought, when I mentioned the camera, his first reaction wasn't surprise. She didn't say any of this yet. She had learned over the course of a life that had not always been kind, that knowing something and saying it were 2 entirely different skills, and the second one required timing. Adrian was looking at her again. "You tackled me," he said. There was something in his voice that might have been the beginning of rye if the situation had allowed it. "You were about to be shot," Elena said. "Most people," Adrian said, "see a sniper scope and run the other direction." "Most people," Elena replied, "weren't trained by a father who spent 20 years teaching military recruits that hesitation is a choice you make about someone else's safety." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Your father was military range instructor. He taught me that danger announces itself if you're paying attention. Most people stop paying attention because it's exhausting and nothing bad usually happens." She looked at him directly. "Something bad happened tonight." "Yes," Adrian said quietly. "It did, and whoever planned it knew your schedule, knew your security camera placement, knew which guard to move and when." She held his gaze. "That's not a rival organization taking a guess. That's someone who knew exactly where you were going to be standing and exactly which moment you'd be exposed." The fluorescent light above them hummed. Somewhere above, she could hear the controlled chaos of the estate lockdown, beginning voices, footsteps, doors. Adrian Moretti, who had not survived 43 years in Chicago by being slow, said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, 30 minutes. The study. Elena picked up the empty tray she had somehow still been holding. She hadn't even noticed she was still carrying it, and set it against the wall. "I'll be there," she said. She walked toward the service stairs, and it was only when she was 2 flights up and alone in the staff corridor that she let herself stop and breathe and feel the shake that had been waiting in her hands since the moment she'd seen that reflection in the trees. Her father used to say, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more." She had made that decision about 3 seconds on a cold balcony, and now a man was alive who hadn't expected to be. And somewhere on the other side of this estate, a person was already trying to figure out how the plan had failed. She needed to be smarter than that person. She needed to be faster. She pressed her palms flat against the wall, felt the solid cold of it, counted her breaths, and made herself think. The study was on the second floor, east wing. She'd cleaned it dozens of times. She knew where the furniture was, where the door hinges were, which way the windows faced. She knew which cabinet was always locked and which drawer Adrian never opened in front of staff. She knew the estate the way a person knows a place they've moved through invisibly for months, not as a guest who admires it, but as a worker who understands every inch of what it costs to maintain. That knowledge had just saved a life. She was still deciding what to do with the rest of it. When Elena walked into the study 30 minutes later, Gabriel Torres was already there. She recognized him from her first week on the job head of internal logistics, tall and methodical, a man who kept his emotions in a very small, very tightly sealed box. He nodded at her when she came in, a nod that was neither warm nor cold, simply the acknowledgement of one professional to another. Nathan Cross was also there, standing near the window with his arms crossed and the careful expression of a man composing himself. Adrian sat at the desk, closed the door, he said, and when it was closed, he said, "Tell me everything you saw tonight, from the beginning." Elena sat down because he hadn't told her to stand, and she wasn't going to perform deference she didn't feel. She told him about the camera. She told him about the window. She described the moment. Nathan dismissed the guard, careful, precise, exactly as she'd observed it. She watched Nathan's face as she described it, and his expression barely moved, which told her more than a reaction would have. She told Adrian about the birds going quiet. She told him about the reflection. She told him about the calculation she'd made in the second and a half between seeing the reflection and deciding to move. When she finished, the room was quiet. "You could have run," Gabriel said. Not an accusation, a genuine observation. "He would have been dead," Elena said. "You didn't know him. I don't need to know someone to decide they shouldn't be shot." She paused. "And honestly, the shot was going to happen whether I ran or not. Running wasn't going to make me safer. It was just going to make me someone who watched." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Adrian. Adrian was looking at Nathan. Nathan's expression was that of a loyal man who had been through a crisis and was managing it professionally. Everything about his posture, his expression, his measured breathing said, "I am the person you can trust right now. I am steady. I am with you." Elena had worked in enough places to know that the person working hardest to look trustworthy was often the one you needed to watch most carefully. "Nathan," Adrian said, "walk me through the guard rotation, specifically why Marcus was moved from balcony security." There was the smallest pause. "If you hadn't been watching for it, you would have missed it." Nathan recovered smoothly. "Marcus reported a disturbance near the east gate about 20 minutes before the incident," Nathan said. "I redirected him to assess standard protocol for a peripheral security concern during an event." "Who reported the disturbance?" Gabriel asked. "The report came through the secondary radio channel," Nathan said. "I'll pull the logs." "Please do," Adrian said. And the way he said please, Elena noticed had nothing warm in it. After Nathan left to pull the radio logs, Gabriel said quietly, "Miss Parker, you said the maintenance request came through with a staff ID. Do you know whose?" Elena hesitated for just a moment. Then she said, "I noticed during setup that 2 maintenance work orders had been logged under my employee number. I was going to report it to HR tomorrow. I assumed it was an administrative error." Adrian looked up sharply. "What work orders?" "One for a third-floor window adjustment. One for a camera angle correction on the north balcony." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Gabriel turned to his tablet and began typing rapidly. Adrian said very quietly, "Not to anyone in particular, someone used her number to do this." "Someone who knew it wouldn't matter," Elena said. "Because no one was going to ask me. No one was going to think I had the knowledge or the access. I'm the newest maid. I'm invisible." She said it without bitterness. Just a flat, honest statement of a fact she had lived with long enough to report it accurately. Whoever did this needed a scapegoat and chose the person least likely to be believed. Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. When he looked back at her, he said, "You could have not told us about the work orders." "Excuse me?" "You could have stayed quiet about the maintenance logs. Let the investigation run. If no one connected the work orders to your ID, you'd be clear. If they did connect them, you'd at least have time to prepare." Elena stared at him. "You're suggesting I should have calculated my own safety against telling you the truth." "I'm noting that you didn't." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you what I know because it's relevant and because it's true, and because if I start calculating which parts of the truth to share based on how they affect me, I become exactly the kind of person who turned that camera away from your balcony. The room was very quiet. Gabriel had stopped typing. Adrian Moretti, whose entire life had been built on a system where information was currency and truth was almost always negotiated, looked at the woman across the desk from him with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Parker," he finally said, "I'm going to ask you to stay in the estate tonight, not as a prisoner, as someone whose account of events I believe and whose safety I cannot currently guarantee outside these walls." Elena considered this. "And in the morning?" "In the morning," he said, "I'd like your help figuring out who tried to kill me." She should have said no. Every practical instinct she had, and Elena Parker had excellent instincts, honed by years of emergency dispatch work where your read on a situation was the only thing standing between an outcome and a catastrophe, told her that getting deeper into the business of Adrian Moretti was not compatible with a long and peaceful life. But there were maintenance orders logged under her employee number. Her name was already in this, whether she chose it or not. "I'll need access to the housekeeping logs," she said. "Staff schedules, maintenance requests, delivery records. Everything for the last 30 days. Adrian didn't blink. "You'll have it. And I want it understood clearly," she continued, "that I'm not working for you. I'm not on your payroll for this. I'm not doing this because I owe you anything. I'm doing this because my name is on those work orders and I intend to clear it. Understood? And if I find something that implicates someone who reports to you, I will not protect them on your behalf." Something shifted in his expression at that. Something more complicated. "No," he said. "You won't." She nodded once, the short, definitive nod of a woman who had just established terms she intended to keep. "One more thing," she said, and she was already standing, already moving toward the door, because she was tired and her feet hurt, and there was a tremor in her hands she was managing by keeping them in motion. "Your security camera on the north balcony. When whoever adjusted it did so, they moved it to face the wall. That means they needed the camera blind. That means they knew the camera was there and where it was pointed. That's not something a contractor knows. That's not something a guest knows." She stopped at the door and looked back at him. "That's something someone who has walked that balcony 100 times knows. Someone who knows your security system from the inside." She paused. "You're looking for someone you trust." Adrian held her gaze. "I know," he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter than she'd heard from him all evening, something that sounded almost human. "Then I'll see you in the morning, Mr. Moretti." She opened the door and walked out into the corridor. And it was only when she was out of sight and around the first corner that she let herself stop again, lean against the wall, close her eyes, and breathe. Someone had tried to kill Adrian Moretti tonight. Someone who knew his schedule, his security layout, his camera placement, his guard rotation. Someone who had used Elena Parker's employee number to cover their tracks, choosing her as a scapegoat because she was the person in this estate whom no one would think to believe. The plan had been elegant and invisible, the way all the best plans were operating through the spaces that the people in power had never bothered to understand. The same spaces that Elena had spent 3 months learning precisely because no one thought they mattered. She was already starting to understand what had happened. She was already pulling threads, sorting data, organizing the fragments of observations she'd been collecting for months without knowing what they were building toward. Her father used to say that the most dangerous thing in any situation wasn't the obvious threat. The obvious threat you could prepare for. The most dangerous thing was the person who had already decided they were invisible to you. Tonight on that balcony, someone had tried to use that invisibility as a weapon. Tomorrow, Elena Parker was going to show them what it really meant when someone invisible decided to pay attention. She pushed off the wall, straightened her uniform, and walked toward the staff quarters. She didn't sleep for a long time, but when she did, her hands had stopped shaking. Elena was up before 5 in the morning, not because anyone had told her to be, not because there was an alarm or a schedule or an obligation. She was up because her mind had spent the night doing what her mind always did when it had been given a problem it couldn't solve. Yet it had kept working, methodically, relentlessly, the way a river keeps moving even when you can't see it in the dark. She lay in the narrow staff quarters bed and stared at the ceiling and went over every detail she had cataloged from the night before. The camera, the window, the birds, Nathan sending the guard away, the maintenance work orders logged under her employee number, the reflection in the trees, the way Nathan's expression hadn't moved when she mentioned the camera. By the time the sky outside the small window began to lighten from black to gray, she had arranged those details into a shape she didn't like at all. She got up, washed her face, and went to find Gabriel Torres. He was already in the operations room on the ground floor, which surprised her and also didn't. He had the look of a man who hadn't slept either, But where Elena's sleeplessness had been internal and running, Gabriel's looked more like he had been sitting in the same chair for 6 hours, making himself process things he didn't want to be true. He looked up when she came in. He didn't look surprised to see her there at 5 in the morning. "Coffee's on the side table," he said. "Thank you." She poured a cup, sat down across from him. "Did you pull the radio logs Nathan mentioned? The disturbance report from the East Gate?" Gabriel looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "There is no East Gate disturbance report." The words landed in the quiet room like something dropped from a height. "Not on the primary log," he continued carefully. "Not on the secondary channel. Not on any record I can find from that time window. The call Nathan described, the call that pulled Marcus away from the balcony, does not appear to exist." Elena wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "So he lied about why the guard was moved. I'm saying there's no record supporting what he told us." "Gabriel?" "He lied." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. He was a careful man. She could see him weighing the professional consequences of every word. "The discrepancy is significant," he said finally, which was the most Gabriel Torres way of saying yes that Elena had ever heard. "I need to see the full maintenance log," she said. "Every work order submitted in the last 30 days. And I need to see the access records, who badged into which sections of the estate and when. I can pull those. I also need the delivery records. External contractors, caterers, anyone who had access to the estate for setup." He was already pulling them up on his tablet. She came around the table and stood beside him, because there was no point in being formal about it. And they spent the next hour going through records together, and it was in that hour that Lena began to understand the true shape of what had been built inside the Moretti estate, piece by piece, over months. The maintenance work orders logged under her employee number were only the beginning. When Gabriel pulled the full 30-day access record, they found something that made Elena set down her coffee cup and not pick it up again. Her badge, the staff ID card she wore on a lanyard and used to access the service corridors, had been used to enter the North Utility Corridor 6 times in the past 3 weeks. 6 times on 6 different occasions, always between 10 and 11 at night. Elena had never worked a shift past 8 in the evening. She didn't even have authorization for the North Utility Corridor. It was a restricted area. "Someone cloned my badge," she said. Gabriel pulled up the corresponding camera footage for those 6 access points. The North Utility Corridor camera had been experiencing technical difficulties, according to the maintenance log. The fault had been logged and a repair request submitted. The repair request was still pending. The fault report had been submitted using Elena's employee number. Elena felt something cold move through her that wasn't the November air. "They built this over weeks," she said. "Whoever did this. They weren't improvising. They were constructing it, piece by piece, using me as the scaffolding. Because you were the safest choice," Gabriel said quietly. "New employee, no internal allies, no history here, no one who would automatically defend you." And when the investigation came, Elena said, "They were going to find my badge access to the restricted area, my work orders on the camera and the window, and everyone was going to say, obviously it was the new maid. She was turned, she was paid off. She created the access." She paused. Who would have questioned it? Gabriel didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Adrian came in at 6:45. He looked like he had slept in his clothes, which Elena suspected was because he poured coffee, looked at the spread of records on the table, and sat down without saying anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Show me." They showed him. Elena watched his face as Gabriel walked him through the cloned badge records, the fabricated maintenance requests, the camera fault report, the radio log that didn't exist. She watched him very carefully, because she had decided early in her career as a dispatcher that you learned more about a person from how they received bad information than from how they shared good news. Adrian Morty received it the way she had expected him to, with almost no visible reaction at all, which meant the reaction was happening somewhere underneath, behind the controlled surface, in whatever private interior space he used to process things that cost him. Only once did his composure slip, and it was brief, and he recovered it quickly. When Gabriel showed him the cloned badge records and explained how the North Utility Corridor access had been repeated 6 times using Elena's ID, Adrian looked up from the tablet and said very quietly, "He's been planning this for months, not someone, not the attacker." Elena noticed the pronouns. She didn't say anything. "He has access to the badge cloning equipment," Gabriel said. "That's not something an outside contractor could have done. The estate security system requires an internal administrator code to generate duplicate access credentials." "How many people have administrator access to the security system?" Elena asked. 3, Gabriel said. "Myself." The head of he paused. The name sat in the room. Adrian stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to them and his hands in his pockets. And Elena could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, not the tension of fear exactly, but the tension of a man who is dismantling something he has spent years building and doesn't entirely know how to hold the pieces. I've known Nathan Cross for 22 years, Adrian said. His voice was even. That was the worst part. Elena thought how even it was. We grew up in the same neighborhood. He came to work for me when I was 26, and he was 24, and neither of us had anything that anyone would call a future. He was quiet for a moment. I trusted him with things I've never told anyone else. Elena let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said carefully, Mr. Moretti, I know this is difficult. Don't, he said. And it wasn't sharp, it was just final. She stopped. He turned around. His face had resolved back into its self-controlled, present processing. What else? Gabriel hesitated. Then he pulled up one more record on the tablet and slid it across the table. Elena had already seen it. She had found it 40 minutes before Adrian arrived, and she had sat with it for a while because it was the piece that explained why. It was a series of internal financial transfers from the Moretti Shipping Company's secondary accounts. The transfers were small enough to avoid automated flagging, spread over 14 months, routed through 3 different holding companies before arriving at accounts that bore no direct connection to anything Elena could identify. The total was $8.3 million. He's been stealing, Gabriel said, from the legitimate shipping operation, the one that Adrian has been restructuring to comply with federal reporting standards. How long have you known? Adrian asked Gabriel. His voice was very quiet. I found the first anomaly 6 weeks ago, Gabriel said. I was going to bring it to you after I was certain. I wanted to be certain before I brought an accusation like this. 6 weeks, Adrian said. Nathan knew you were looking. Gabriel paused. Yes, so the audit. My plan to restructure the shipping company, if I moved forward with that. It would have exposed everything, Elena said. She said it because she could see Adrian working toward it, and she didn't think he needed to do it alone. The transfers, the fraudulent accounts, all of it. Nathan needed to stop the audit. The only way to stop the audit was to stop you. The room was very quiet. He tried to kill me, Adrian said, to protect $8 million he stole from me. And to protect what the $8 million represents, Elena said. Because if the audit runs, it doesn't just expose the transfers. It exposes everyone Nathan has been dealing with. The port officials, the contractors, all of us up. He's not just protecting money. He's protecting a network he's been building parallel to yours, using your resources for over a year. Adrian sat down slowly. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, and Elena waited because some information needed room to land before you started talking around it. He chose you, Adrian said finally. He was looking at her as the scapegoat. He chose you specifically. He chose me because I was the safest choice, Elena said. I was new. I had no relationships here that would defend me. I was poor. I was a woman. I was a maid. If the evidence pointed to me, the people doing the investigation were going to follow that path because it was easy and it was tidy, and no one was going to fight for me. Something moved across Adrian's face. It wasn't pity. Pity was condescending and she didn't want it. What it was, she tried to read it, was something closer to recognition. The recognition of someone who has just understood that a thing they created made a certain kind of harm possible. The culture in this house, he said slowly, the way the staff is managed. They're afraid of you, Elena said, because she wasn't going to soften it. Not all of them, but enough. They do what they're told. They don't ask questions. They keep their eyes down and they're grateful for the paycheck, and they do not volunteer information, because volunteering information has never once gone well for anyone on the lower floors of this estate. She paused. That's not an accident. That's what you built. And Nathan used it. He knew that if he put my employee number on those records, no one on the staff would stand up and say, wait a moment, let me ask her first. They would just accept it. Adrian was very still. I'm not saying this to attack you, she continued, because she could see the rigidity in him. She wanted to be accurate, not cruel. I'm saying it because if you understand how it worked, you can understand how to stop it from working the same way again. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. How are you not afraid of me right now? She considered that honestly. Because I've already decided that the worst thing you can do to me is fire me, she said. And at this point, with my badge number on a forged security record, being fired is probably not my biggest problem. He almost laughed. She heard the breath of it. It disappeared immediately, but she had heard it all right, he said. He straightened, and she could see him shift into the part of himself that had kept him alive this long, the part that was decisive, strategic, forward-moving. Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to confront Nathan directly. Not yet. Not until we have everything. Agreed, Gabriel said. We're also not going to involve the external security firm. Not yet. We don't know who Nathan has been in contact with, and I don't want to tip our hand. He looked at Elena. You said there are more records to go through. The delivery logs, she said. I want to look at every external access in the last 30 days. Because someone physically moved a rifle into position in those trees last night. That rifle didn't walk there by itself. Pull everything, Adrian said to Gabriel. Gabriel nodded and went to work. Elena refilled her coffee, because it was going to be a long morning, and sat down and began to read. It was in the delivery logs that she found the next piece. 3 weeks earlier, a maintenance crew had been contracted to service the estate's outdoor lighting system. The contract had been authorized under Nathan's administrator code and signed off by a company called Meridian Property Services. Una flagged it immediately because Meridian Property Services did not appear in any of the estate's previous contractor records. She dug deeper. The company had been registered 14 months ago. Its principal officer was listed under a name she didn't recognize. Its registered address was a mail forwarding service in Gary. Gabriel, she said. Meridian Property Services. He was beside her in 20 seconds. They went through the Meridian file together. The outdoor lighting contract had given the crew access to the estate grounds for 2 full days. The cruise log showed 4 workers. Their ID records were on file in the contractor system. Logged properly, photographed, everything in order. Elena looked at the photographs for a long time. Then she said, 3 of these people look exactly the same. Gabriel looked at her. What do you mean, the background? The lighting angle. The way they're positioned relative to the camera. She pointed at the photographs. These 3 ID photos were taken at the same location with the same light source, within minutes of each other. They were processed individually through the system, but they were photographed together. That's not how legitimate ID verification works. Gabriel pulled up the original submission files and looked at the metadata. 3 of the 4 photographs had been uploaded within an 11-minute window from the same IP address. They submitted fake IDs for 3 out of 4 crew members, Elena said. The 4th one is probably a real contractor who had no idea what was happening around him. The other 3 were planted. That crew didn't come here to service the lighting. They came to scout the grounds, Gabriel said, and to identify the approach path through the tree line, Elena said, and to position whatever they needed to position for last night. She sat back. This has been running for months, she said. Every piece of this, the scouting, the financial transfers, the badge cloning, building the file under my name, Nathan, has been operating this for at least 14 months, maybe longer. Gabriel said nothing. He had the expression of a man who was recalculating something fundamental. Elena was about to say more when the door to the operations room opened and Nathan Cross walked in. He looked rested. She hated that about him, how rested he looked, how collected, how entirely comfortable in the space. He had a tablet under his arm, and his expression was professionally concerned, the expression of a senior security officer dealing with an active crisis with appropriate gravity. Good morning, he said. He looked at Elena with an expression that was pleasant and completely impenetrable. I didn't realize you'd be here this early, Miss Parker. I had things to review, Elena said. Of course, he turned to Gabriel. I've got the updated security sweep results. The north perimeter is clear. I have a team reviewing the tree line now. He set his tablet on the table. I also have a preliminary profile on the possible shooter based on the trajectory analysis. If we can get ballistics, Nathan, Adrian said. He was standing in the doorway behind Nathan. Elena hadn't heard him come in. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there or how much he'd heard, but something in his voice made Nathan turn. And the moment Nathan turned and looked at Adrian's face, something shifted in the air of the room. It was almost nothing. It was a fractional change in the set of Nathan's shoulders, a micro-adjustment in his expression, the recalibration of a man who had just looked at something and gotten information from it that he hadn't expected. He recovered in less than a second, but Elena had been watching for it. The Eastgate disturbance report, Adrian said. The one that pulled Marcus from the balcony. I need to hear you walk me through that again. Of course, Nathan said. His voice was steady. I received a call on the secondary channel. A pause. It came in as an unidentified call. Ground patrol frequency. And you didn't verify the source before pulling a guard from my personal security during an active event. It was a credible report, and the timing required a quick decision. There's no record of the call. The room held its breath. Nathan looked at Gabriel. Then at Elena. Something happened behind his eyes, a rapid, invisible calculation, so fast she almost missed it. Then he said, the secondary channel logs sometimes have gaps during high traffic events. The system's been noted before as, my badge has been used 6 times in the last 3 weeks to access the North Utility Corridor, Elena said. She kept her voice level. She was watching him. I've never been in the North Utility Corridor. I don't even have authorization for it. Nathan looked at her, and this time the expression was different. This time there was something in it she recognized, not from professional experience, but from something older and more instinctive, the look of a person who has just been cornered and is deciding how to respond. Someone could have copied her credentials, he said. That's something we should investigate. The administrator code used to generate duplicate badge credentials, Gabriel said, is logged to your account, Nathan. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elena had ever heard. Nathan stood very still. His face had cleared of all expression now, not the careful neutrality of before, but something stripped down to nothing. The face you have when you've stopped performing and haven't yet decided what to replace the performance with. Adrian walked slowly to the table and stood on the other side of it, facing Nathan directly. 22 years, Adrian said. His voice was almost quiet enough to be gentle. 22 years, and you looked me in the eye last night after someone tried to put a bullet through my head, and you stood in my study and lied to my face. Adrian, don't, and that word, that single word was nothing like a shout. It was worse than a shout. It was the sound of something closing. Don't use my name right now. Nathan looked at the table, looked at Elena, looked at Gabriel. He was calculating. She could see it, calculating exits, calculating angles, calculating what was known versus what was provable. He was the kind of man who would calculate even now, even in the corner of a room with no doors left open to him. You have speculation, Nathan said. His voice had changed. The professional warmth was gone. What was left was harder, cleaner, more precise. You have log anomalies and timestamp questions. You don't have proof that I ordered anything. Not yet, Elena said. He looked at her, and this time there was nothing pleasant about it. You, he said, are a maid, she said. And you made a mistake when you decided that was a limitation. She held his gaze. She didn't look away. She had stared down worse things than Nathan Cross. She had spent years on a dispatch line, receiving the worst moments of strangers' lives and finding the right words anyway. And she had learned in those years that composure wasn't about not being afraid. It was about refusing to let fear have the last word. Adrian has you on camera leaving the East Operations Room at 9:17 last night, Gabriel said quietly. 11 minutes after you received what you claim was an unidentified disturbance call. You went back to that room, Nathan. The same room where the secondary communications equipment is stored. He paused. We have the footage. Nathan's jaw tightened. The Meridian Property Services crew, Elena said. The contractor accessed from 3 weeks ago. 3 of the 4 IDs were fraudulent. The photographs were uploaded from the same IP address within 11 minutes of each other. She watched his face. Do you want me to keep going? Or do you want to save us both some time? Nathan said nothing. The nothing was its own kind of answer. Adrian stood very still on the other side of the table, and Elena could see what it was costing him, not the anger, because the anger would come later, alone, in some private room where he was allowed to feel what this actually meant. What it was costing him right now was the 22 years, the history, the specific weight of having trusted someone completely and finding out that the trust had been a room with no floor. You're going to stay in the estate, Adrian said finally. You're not going to contact anyone outside. Your phones, your credentials, and your system access are suspended effective now. He looked at Gabriel. Have Reyes and Castillo take him to the East Suite. Full monitoring. Gabriel nodded. Nathan looked at Adrian with an expression that was almost something real, not remorse. Something more complicated than remorse. Something that, in another story between different men, might have been grief. I was going to lose everything, Nathan said quietly, when the audit ran. Everything I'd built. You built it with my money, Adrian said. On my time. Everything I'd built, Nathan said again, as if Adrian hadn't spoken. As if the words needed to be said for his own sake, not anyone else's. 14 months. And all it was going to take was one audit, so you decided to kill me instead. Nathan didn't answer. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, which was the most devastating thing he could have done, not fury, not confrontation, just the simple decision to stop looking. Get him out of here, Adrian said. Reyes and Castillo came. Nathan went. The door closed. Gabriel let out a breath that he'd been holding for what seemed like a very long time. Elena sat down because her legs had decided they'd been cooperative long enough and were requesting a moment of acknowledgement. Adrian stood at the window, not talking, just standing. Elena looked at his back and thought about what he'd said 22 years. She thought about what it meant to build your life around a structure of loyalty, only to find out the structure had a fault running through its center the whole time. She thought about the particular kind of grief that didn't have a clean name because it wasn't exactly loss, and it wasn't exactly betrayal. It was both of those things, and also the terrible retroactive rewriting of every memory you had. She thought about saying something, and then she thought about the value of silence, which was something Elena Parker understood almost as well as she understood danger. She waited. After a long time, Adrian turned around. He wasn't wrong about one thing, Adrian said. His voice was different now, stripped of the professional register. Quieter, more tired. I created the conditions, the fear in this house. The culture of just do what you're told and don't ask questions. I made an environment where someone like Nathan could operate for 14 months, and no one came to me because they were afraid to come to me. Elena looked at him carefully. That's true, she said. And the fact that you can say it is something. It's not enough. No, she agreed. It's not. But it's where you start. He looked at her with that expression. She was still learning to read the one that wasn't quite gratitude because it was more complicated than gratitude. The one that was what happened when a person had spent decades surrounded by people who told them what they wanted to hear, and then suddenly found themselves across a table from someone who simply would not do that. Elena, he said, first time he'd used her first name, she noted, we still have a problem. Several, she said. The second stage of whatever Nathan put in motion, he said. He told me something last year. When I brought up the audit for the first time, he said, and I didn't register it then, but I'm registering it now, he said, if anything ever happens to me, there are contingencies. Elena went very still. He wasn't talking about himself, Adrian said. He was talking about the plan. She looked at him. Nathan isn't working alone, Adrian said. He never was. He has people still inside this estate. And somewhere out there, there's still a shooter who didn't complete his assignment last night. Elena's mind was already moving, already pulling forward, already thinking about what came next, already identifying the shape of what they were walking toward. Then we need to move faster than he expected, she said. He expected to be in control of the investigation. He expected to be the one feeding you information. She stood up. He's contained now, but contained doesn't mean finished. He has a phone call to make. He has a signal to send. And if that signal goes out, the contingency activates, Adrian said. Yes, Elena said. They looked at each other across the table, and in that look was the recognition that whatever they had found together in the last 12 hours, this uneasy, unlikely partnership built on a near death and a set of forged maintenance records and the stubborn refusal of one woman to be the scapegoat anyone had planned her to be, it had just become something more urgent, more dangerous, and considerably more complicated. How long before he finds a way to signal someone? Elena asked. 6 hours, Gabriel said from the corner, where he'd been working quietly the whole time. Maybe less. The East Suite has a secondary comms line behind the service panel. I know about it because I installed this estate's systems. Nathan probably knows about it because he supervised that installation. Elena looked at Adrian. 4 hours, she said. We have 4 hours to find everything Nathan was protecting before his contingency activates and we lose our window. Adrian straightened, and she could see it happen, the shift, the gathering, the man who had survived everything he survived, preparing to do it again. 4 hours, he said. Then 4 hours. Elena had worked enough emergency shifts to know what 4 hours felt like when every minute inside it was carrying weight. It didn't feel long. It felt like a rope already halfway through a pulley, moving fast in one direction, and the only question was whether you could get your hands around it before the end passed through. Gabriel pulled the Meridian Property Services financial records, while Elena went back through the estate's internal communications archive. Every message sent through the estate's encrypted internal system in the past 14 months, flagged by sender, cross-referenced against Nathan's administrator login. Adrian sat at the other end of the table and made calls. Quiet calls, precise calls, the kind of calls that a man makes when he has already accepted what's happening and is moving through it rather than against it. She could hear fragments, names she didn't recognize, numbers, the tight economical language of a person who had learned to say exactly what was necessary and nothing more. It was Gabriel who found the first thread that pulled everything else loose. Elena. His voice was flat in the particular way that meant he had found something bad. She crossed to him, looked at the screen. It was a series of internal message threads between Nathan's account, a secondary user ID she didn't recognize, labeled in the system simply as MT7. The messages were sparse, stripped of any identifying detail, written in the shorthand of two people who had communicated this way long enough that they didn't need to explain themselves. The most recent message had been sent at 11:47 the previous night. After the attack, after the lockdown, after Nathan had been in the study with Adrian and Elena and Gabriel, it read delayed, second phase on schedule, hold position. Elena read it twice. Then she said he messaged someone from inside the estate after the lockdown, while he was supposed to be pulling security records. The message was routed through the estate's internal system but bounced through an external relay, Gabriel said. He built a back channel into our own communications infrastructure. Can you trace MT7? I'm working on it. Gabriel's fingers moved across the keyboard. But Elena, the timestamp. 11:47, that's 40 minutes after Nathan left the study. Second phase, she said quietly. She looked at Adrian. He had heard it. He was already standing. What's the second phase? She asked. If the first phase was the assassination, Adrian said slowly. Thinking aloud, the second phase would be what happens after. A leadership vacuum, a war between factions. Nathan steps in as the stabilizing force, positions himself as the man who held everything together after my death. But I didn't die, Elena said. Which means he has to accelerate, Adrian said. He can't wait. Every hour I'm alive and talking to people narrows his window. Gabriel looked up from the screen. MT7 has an internal origin point, he said. The message originated from a device physically inside the estate. The three of them went still. Someone else in this building, Elena said, not a question. Someone with access to a device connected to the back channel Nathan built, Gabriel said. Elena thought about the estate. 300 guests the night before, most of whom were gone now. Staff of 32 security personnel. She thought about the specific way a conspiracy required infrastructure, not just a single actor but a network of smaller decisions, smaller compromises, people who had been bought or pressured, or simply maneuvered into positions they hadn't noticed themselves entering. Who stayed overnight, she asked. After the lockdown, who was still inside the estate? Gabriel pulled the lockdown log. 17 staff members, 8 security personnel, which meant 8 of Nathan's people, whose loyalties were now deeply uncertain. 4 guests who had requested to remain pending the police investigation. The 4 guests, Adrian said immediately. Who are they? Gabriel read the names. Elena didn't recognize 3 of them. The 4th one made her stop. Victor Hale, she said. He's a port commissioner. Adrian looked at her. Nathan's network includes corrupt port officials, she said. You told me that. Victor Hale is a Lake Michigan Port Commission director. He's been in that role for 3 years. She looked at Gabriel. Was Hale on the original guest list? Gabriel checked. He was added to the list 4 days before the event. Authorization signed by Nathan Cross. The room was very quiet. Nathan brought him here, Elena said. He was never here for the charity reception. He was here to witness the transition, to be present at the moment when everything changed and be ready to move. Adrian sat down, not the sitting down of exhaustion, but the sitting down of someone who needs a moment to hold the architecture of a thing in their mind without moving, because the thing is large and its dimensions keep expanding. Victor Hale is inside this estate right now, he said. Yes, Elena said. And he received a message last night saying second phase on schedule. Yes, which means he's not waiting for news. He's waiting for an instruction. She nodded. And then she said the thing she'd been working toward since Gabriel had read the name. If Hale gets nervous, if he decides the operation is compromised and tries to leave or tries to make contact with someone outside, we lose him. And we lose the chain. He can't leave, Adrian said. The estate is locked down. Lockdown's end, Elena said. We have 4 hours, maybe less. And Victor Hale woke up this morning inside a house where Nathan Cross is under monitoring, and the maid he chose as a scapegoat is apparently sitting in the operations room, going through every record in the system. She let that sit for a moment. He's going to make a move, she said. Not because he's panicking, because he's calculating. Men like Hale always have an exit plan, and right now his exit plan depends on whether he still has a working ally inside this estate. Adrian looked at Gabriel. Find MT7. Working on it, Gabriel said. Find it fast. Elena poured more coffee that had gone cold and drank it anyway, and went back to the communications archive and kept reading. She found it 20 minutes later. Not MT7 that took Gabriel another hour. What Elena found was a discarded receipt that had been photographed and attached to an internal expense report filed 8 months ago. It was the kind of thing that only existed in a system because someone had filed it carelessly. Years of administrative routine overriding the caution that a more deliberate person would have shown. The receipt was from a restaurant in Gary, Indiana. The date was 14 months ago, the same month Meridian Property Services had been registered. The expense had been filed under Nathan's account as a business development dinner. The restaurant's name didn't mean anything to her. What meant something was the credit card number printed at the bottom of the receipt, not Nathan's estate card, not any card connected to the Moretti accounts. A personal card. A card that, when Gabriel ran the number through the financial records they'd been building, resolved to an account held by a company called Cross Meridian Holdings, LLC, registered 14 months ago. Sole officer, Nathan Alexander Cross. He owns Meridian, Elena said. Not surprised. Just confirming the shape she had already traced in her mind. He created the contractor company. He used it to get his own people into the estate. The outdoor lighting crew, those were his people. And the contract paid Meridian $12,000 for 2 days of access, which means he paid himself to infiltrate his own employer's property. The audacity, Gabriel said quietly, and she could hear real emotion in it, not admiration. The opposite of admiration, the genuine stunned recognition of how far and how long a trusted person can run a betrayal before anyone looks at it directly. It's not audacity, Elena said, it's calculation. He built every piece of this to be deniable or to point somewhere else. The contractor company has his name on it, but it's buried under 3 registration layers. The badge cloning uses an administrator code that 3 people share. The maintenance work orders are under my employee number. She paused. Every single piece of this is designed so that if one layer is pulled back, there's another layer underneath pointing a different direction. Except now we've pulled all the layers back, Adrian said. He had been standing in the doorway for the last few minutes, listening. Elena hadn't heard him come back in. She was getting used to that, the way he moved, quietly, with the practiced invisibility of a man who had learned long ago that being seen on your own terms was worth more than simply being seen. We have the Meridian connection, she said. We have the badge cloning traced to his administrator code. We have the radio log that doesn't exist. We have the financial transfers. She looked at Adrian. We have enough, he asked. For what you're going to decide to do with it, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. She wasn't going to make that decision for him. She was many things, but she was not going to stand in this room and tell a man what to do with the evidence of his oldest friend's betrayal. That was his weight. She had helped him find it. Carrying it was his. Elena. His voice was careful. There are ways to handle this that don't involve law enforcement. I know, she said. I know what the organization is, Mr. Moretti. She kept her voice even not cold, just precise. I've known what it is since before I applied for this job. I didn't walk into this estate believing I was cleaning house for a philanthropist. He was quiet. But I'm going to tell you something, she said, and you can do with it whatever you want. I've spent 6 years on emergency dispatch. I have listened to the worst moments of more people's lives than I can count. And a disproportionate number of those calls, the ones that come in from certain neighborhoods, from certain blocks, from people who can't afford to call a lawyer instead of 911, those calls have a common thread. They involve people who are afraid, not of strangers, of the systems around them, the people who are supposed to protect them. She paused. Some of those systems have names. Some of them wear uniforms. And some of them operate out of estates on the lake and call themselves something legitimate while the fear moves through the neighborhoods underneath. Adrian said nothing. I'm not judging you, she said. I'm telling you what I know. And what I know is that Nathan Cross tried to use me, tried to build his exit out of my reputation, my name, my invisibility, because the system that exists in this house made that possible. Because people like me don't get believed. Because people like me are furniture. She held his gaze. I want to make sure that when this is over, that stops being true. Not just for me. For everyone in this building who spent the last several years walking quietly, because loud got you fired. The room was very quiet. Gabriel had stopped typing. Adrian looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want me to do?" And Elena said, "I want you to let the evidence speak instead of burying it. I want Victor Hale questioned on the record. I want the Meridian documents preserved. I want federal investigators in this building with access to everything we found." She paused. "And I want the staff who were intimidated by Nathan, the ones who saw things and stayed quiet because they were afraid. I want them treated as witnesses, not liabilities." The silence stretched. Then Gabriel's computer made a sound. He looked at the screen and went very still. "I found MT7, he said. The internal trace had resolved to a device physically located in the East Wing guest suite, the suite assigned to Victor Hale. But that wasn't what had made Gabriel go still. MT7 sent a message 3 minutes ago, Gabriel said. He looked up. His face had changed. It says, "Proceed to boathouse. Package already in transit." The word boathouse hit Elena like cold water. She was already standing. "The boathouse on the south dock, is there a way out from there? By water?" "The dock connects to the private waterway," Adrian said, and his voice had sharpened entirely. From there, you can reach the main channel in under 15 minutes. Nathan's financial records, Elena said rapidly. The original transfers. Where are the physical copies? The ledgers, the contracts, anything on paper that predates the digital system. Adrian's expression changed. The secondary archive, in the boathouse. The estate's original business records are stored there. Nathan has always been the one who maintained access to that archive. That's what he's moving, Elena said. He's not running, he's recovering. The digital evidence we've found, he knows it exists because he built the system it's in. He knows what we can access. But if there's a physical archive that predates the digital record, that has original signatures, original contracts, it would be the proof that runs in both directions, Adrian said. The transfers, the port agreements, everything. He's taking it so we can't give it to anyone, Elena said. Or he's taking it to use as leverage. If he has the original documents, he has leverage over every person whose name is on them, including people in this building and outside it. She was already moving toward the door. We have to get to the boathouse before Nathan's contact does. Nathan is in the East Suite under monitoring, Gabriel said. Nathan didn't send that message, Elena said. Hale did. From Nathan's back channel. Hale has been active this whole time. He's been running the second stage from inside the Get Suite while we were focused on Nathan. Gabriel was already on the radio to Reyes and Castillo. Lock down Hale's suite, do not let him move. But even as he said it, Elena felt the timing in her gut, the way it sometimes felt on a dispatch call when you heard the background sound shift, and knew before anyone said it that the situation had changed. She looked at Adrian. How long does it take to get it from the East Wing guest suite to the boathouse by the service corridor? He calculated. 7 minutes. Hale sent that message 3 minutes ago. They moved. Adrian knew the service corridors differently than Elena did, where she knew them from 3 months of work. He knew them from 40 years of a life lived inside this building. And in this moment, those 40 years were worth something because he moved through them with the certainty of someone who had never needed to think about the route. Elena stayed close, reading the space around her the way her father had taught her to read an unfamiliar range points of cover, angles, what was visible from where the light was and where it wasn't. They came down the last flight of service stairs and pushed through the door into the cold air and the sound of the water. The boathouse sat at the end of the dock, old stone and timber, lit from the inside by the thin orange glow of a bare overhead bulb. The dock lights were on. The water was black and moving. The cold off the lake was immediate and sharp. Through the boathouse window, Elena could see a figure moving. There's someone already inside, she said quietly. Adrian had a phone to his ear. Gabriel. Police response ETA? She heard Gabriel's voice through the phone, thin and precise, 14 minutes. I called it in when you moved. They're coming. 14 minutes. The thought passed through Elena's mind that 14 minutes was a long time. She touched Adrian's arm. Let me go first. He looked at her like that was the most irrational thing anyone had ever said to him. I know the layout of that boathouse, she said. I cleaned it twice. I know where the lights are, where the door sticks, where the storage shelf blocks the sight line from the east wall. You don't. I'm not going to argue about this, she said. Give me 30 seconds, then follow. She didn't wait for him to agree. She went. The boathouse door was unlocked, pulled to, not latched. Elena pushed it open slowly, feeling the familiar resistance of the swollen wood that always stuck in cold weather, managing it quietly, stepping inside. A man stood with his back to her at the far end of the boathouse, pulling a metal file box from a shelf. Victor Hale. She recognized the back of his head from the staff briefing photos. Gabriel had pulled gray hair, broad shoulders, the posture of a man who had spent 3 decades exercising authority in rooms where everyone else was careful around him. He hadn't heard her come in. He was focused on the file box, on the stack of documents beneath it, on the speed of his own exit. She said, Commissioner Hale. He spun. The surprise on his face lasted exactly 1 second before it was replaced by something harder, something that had decided how to look at her. Who are you? He said. My name is Elena Parker, she said. I work here. He looked at her uniform, at the fact that she was a maid. And she watched his face make the same calculation Nathan had made, the same calculation everyone in this building had made for 3 months, the rapid, automatic downward adjustment that happened when a person in authority looked at the service staff, the mental filing of this person into the category of not relevant, not dangerous, not a factor. Get out. This doesn't concern you. Those documents concern me, Elena said. They're evidence in an ongoing investigation, and you're removing them from a crime scene. Investigation, Hale repeated, and he almost laughed. You don't run investigations. I found the Meridian connection, Elena said. I found the badge cloning records. I found the communications archive where Nathan's back channel is documented, including your MT7 account and the message you sent 40 minutes ago. She paused. The police are 14 minutes away. You've got about 6 minutes to decide what you want the next hour of your life to look like. Hale looked at her. Then for the first time, the certainty in his face cracked not much, just enough. The crack of a man recalculating. You have nothing, he said, but his voice had shifted. I have everything Nathan built to protect himself, she said. And the thing about building a system that protects you from accusation is that once someone else understands the system, it protects them from you. Hale's hand moved. She saw it before it completed the reach toward his jacket, the location of the reach, the specific angle of it, and she moved without deciding to, dropping her shoulder and stepping left the way her father had drilled into her on the range, not fighting the motion but redirecting it, and Hale's hand found air where Elena's shoulder had been. He was bigger than her. He was also 40 years older and had not spent 6 years working dispatch shifts that required sustained physical alertness, and more relevantly, he had spent those same 40 years in rooms where no one ever pushed back. Elena drove her elbow into the shelf beside her, sending a heavy wooden bracket off the edge and into Hale's path, buying herself 2 steps of distance. And then she reached up and hit the emergency floodlight switch on the boathouse wall, the one she knew was there, because she had hit it by accident the first week she'd cleaned the building and spent 10 minutes figuring out how to turn it off. The boathouse flooded with light. The alarm connected to the flood switch activated simultaneously a short, piercing blast that she had not expected, but in retrospect made complete sense because she had never triggered it before and hadn't known what it did. The sound of a second shot, different from the suppressed rifle the previous night, sharper, closer, broke the window on the far wall. Elena was already flat against the stone wall beside the door, and Adrian was through the door in the same second. Moving low, Hale was backing toward the dock. He had the file box under his arm. There's a second shooter, Elena said rapidly. He was watching through the window. When the floodlights came on, I know, Adrian said. He was very calm. Not the calm of someone who wasn't afraid. The calm of someone who had decided that whatever happened next, they were going to be present for it. I heard the position. He's on the water, 40, maybe 50 meters out. Elena looked at the illuminated windows. The floodlights had reversed the problem now. The inside of the boathouse was visible from the water, which meant anyone inside was a target. We need to kill the interior light, she said. If we kill the interior light, we're blind, Adrian said. No, she said. If we kill the interior light, he's blind. The floodlights are on the exterior of the building. They're pointing out. Right now, the water is fully lit and the shooter is visible to anyone outside the building. Adrian processed this in about 1 second. Gabriel's coming down the dock right now, Elena said, because the alarm went off. And the exterior floodlights are pointing directly at the water. She reached up and hit the interior light switch. The inside of the boathouse went dark. She heard Hale move, heard him cross the remaining distance to the dock door, heard it open, heard him step out. She heard voices outside, Gabriel's voice and Reyes, and then something she hadn't expected, Hale's voice rising and then stopping, and then the specific sound of a person being told to put their hands up, which is different from most other sounds and doesn't require translation. From the water came a splash, then an engine, then radio communication police were already on the water. The exterior floodlights had lit the shooter's position for every unit approaching from the main channel, and the shooter had understood this in the same moment Elena had understood it and had abandoned his position. But abandoning a position on open water in a lit channel, with police units already moving, was not the same as escaping. Elena heard the engine, heard it change, heard it 4 minutes later go silent. She stood in the dark boathouse and breathed. Adrian stood beside her, close enough that she could hear him breathing too. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Adrian said, very quietly, you triggered the floodlights. I didn't know the alarm would go with them, she admitted. But you knew about the floodlights. I've cleaned this building twice, she said. I hit that switch by accident the first week. I spent 10 minutes figuring out how to turn it off. I remembered where it was. You remembered, he said. Something in his voice that she chose not to examine too closely right now, because the examination could wait and the moment needed to be lived in first. I remember things, she said simply. The dock door opened and Gabriel came in with a flashlight. Behind him, Hale was in Reyes's custody, the file box now in Gabriel's hands. Police are on the water, Gabriel said. The shooter abandoned the boat. He's in the water, they have thermal. They'll have him in the next few minutes. He paused. Victor Hale has been detained. He's asking for a lawyer. He'll get one, Adrian said. Make sure of that. Gabriel looked at him. A small adjustment in his expression. Not quite surprised, Gabriel Torres did not surprise easily, but something like recalibration. The original documents are in the box, Gabriel said. Everything, contracts, ledgers, bank records going back 9 years. Original signatures. He paused. Adrian, this is if this goes to federal investigators.
It goes to federal investigators, Adrian said.
Gabriel went very still. All of it, Adrian said. The box, the digital records, the communications archive. Everything Elena and I found today. It goes to the federal investigation. Elena looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Gabriel, and his face had the expression of a man who has made a decision that he knows is going to cost him considerably and has made it anyway, which is a different kind of expression from the face of someone who is calculating costs and benefits. It was the face of someone who had moved past calculation into something else. Adrian, Gabriel said carefully. If federal investigators have those records, I know, Adrian said. The organization, I know what it means, Gabriel. His voice was quiet and final. I know exactly what it means. He turned and looked at Elena then, and she looked back at him, and she thought about what she had said to him hours earlier in the operations room about survival, without change, being a delayed defeat, about accountability versus gratitude, about what it actually meant to repay someone for something they gave you that couldn't be measured in money. She hadn't expected him to hear it so quickly. She wasn't sure she had expected him to hear it at all. Outside, through the walls of the boathouse, she could hear sirens. She could hear police units on the water. She could hear the estate coming alive with the specific organized chaos of a situation that was finally moving towards something that had a shape she could recognize. Hale was in custody. The second shooter was being pulled from the water. The documents were in Gabriel's hands. Nathan Cross was contained. The plan that had been running for 14 months inside the walls of this estate, the plan that had used Elena Parker as its invisible scaffolding and had nearly ended Adrian Moretti's life on a cold balcony above Lake Michigan, had just run out of room to move. But Elena knew something about investigations. She knew something about what came after the crisis, after the arrests, after the evidence was boxed and cataloged and handed to people with the authority to act on it. She knew that the moment the sirens arrived was not the end. It was the moment when a different kind of hard began. And as the police came through the dock door and Gabriel began the process of explaining what they had and what it meant, Ina stood in the cold boathouse and thought about all the things she had said today that she had never expected to say to a man like Adrian Moretti, and all the things she had meant by them. She thought about her father, who had spent his whole life teaching people to recognize danger. She thought about 6 years of dispatch calls and the voices on the other end of those calls, afraid and real, and waiting for someone to pick up. She thought about the staff of this estate, 32 people who had spent years walking quietly and keeping their eyes down and not asking questions, and what it was going to mean for them when the morning came and everything that had been true about this place was no longer true in quite the same way. The bullet had missed. Nathan was contained. The evidence was preserved, but the work Elena understood was just beginning. The federal agents arrived at 7:43 in the morning. Elena knew the exact time because she was standing in the operations room when Gabriel took the call confirming their ETA, and she looked at the clock on the wall and thought, less than 10 hours since the shot on the balcony. Less than 10 hours since she had dropped her tray and tackled a man she barely knew and changed the direction of everything that followed. 10 hours felt like a different life. The agents came in 2 vehicles, 6 of them professional and measured, with the specific quality of attention that federal investigators carry, the kind that takes in everything in a room without appearing to focus on anything. The lead agent was a woman named Sandra Reeves, 50-something, with close-cropped gray hair and the expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by what people did to each other a long time ago, but had not stopped caring about it. She shook Adrian's hand. She looked at Gabriel. Then she looked at Elena, still in her maid's uniform because no one had thought to offer her anything else, and she said, "You're Elena Parker." "Yes," Elena said. "You found the Meridian connection." Gabriel pulled the financial trace, Elena said. "I found the receipt that gave us the starting point." Sandra Reeves looked at her for a moment with the particular look of a person who is adjusting a preformed picture. Then she said, "Walk me through it," so Elena did. She sat across from Sandra Reeves at the operations room table and walked her through 14 months of Nathan Cross's construction, piece by piece, in the same methodical order she had assembled it herself: the badge cloning, the Meridian contractor company, the financial transfers, The communications back channel, Victor Hale. The MT7 account, the document archive in the boathouse. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, the same way she had spoken on dispatch calls for 6 years, because the most useful thing you could do for someone who needed information was give it to them without the noise. Sandra Reeves took notes and asked questions, and her questions were good, precise, targeted, the questions of someone who understood the architecture of what Elena was describing and was building her own map of it as they talked. When Elena finished, Sandra said, "The maintenance work orders logged under your employee number. You discovered those before the investigation began." "The night of the event," Elena said, "I was going to report it to HR the next morning. I assumed it was administrative error, but you hadn't reported it yet." "No, which means whoever set it up didn't know you'd noticed." Elena paused. She hadn't thought about it from that angle. "No," she said, "they didn't. So when you tackled Mr. Moretti on the balcony, you were already carrying information about the forged records without knowing what that information meant." "I suppose so." Sandra wrote something. "Ms. Parker, I want to be direct with you. Your name is on documents that were used to facilitate a criminal conspiracy. The fact that those documents were forged is supported by the evidence, but until we complete our verification, your cooperation is important." "Are you represented by counsel?" "No," Elena said. "You should be. Not because you're a suspect, I'm telling you clearly. The evidence supports that you're a victim of identity fraud, not a participant. But because this investigation is going to be significant and ongoing, and you should have someone in your corner." Elena thought about that. "I'll find someone," she said. "Good." Sandra closed her notebook. "You're going to need to be available for follow-up interviews. Don't leave Chicago." "I wasn't planning to," Elena said. Sandra Reeves stood, then paused. She looked at Elena with an expression that had stepped briefly outside of professional. "You tackled a man you didn't know to stop a bullet. Then you spent the night and the morning building the evidentiary case that may bring down a 14-month conspiracy." She paused. "That's an unusual combination of skill sets." "I worked emergency dispatch for 6 years," Elena said. "Before that, I worked 3 other jobs that no one thought mattered. I've been underestimated my whole life." Sandra almost smiled. "Well," she said, "Nathan Cross made a significant error in judgment." "Yes," Elena said. "He did." Sandra walked out and Elena sat alone in the operations room for the first time all morning and let herself be still for a moment. Just a moment. The kind of stillness you allow yourself when the acute phase of something is over and the longer, slower phase is beginning, and you need to mark the transition so your body knows it's happened. Her hands were steady. She noted this was something that wasn't quite pride but was close to it. Adrian came in 20 minutes later. He closed the door and sat down across from her, and he looked like a man who had aged 5 years in the last 10 hours, in a way that was not entirely bad, the specific aging of someone who has been carrying something falsely and has finally put it down, and the relief and the weight of it are both real and both visible. "The federal team is going through everything," he said. "Gabriel is with them." "Good. Sandra Reeves told me they expect to move on the port officials within 48 hours. The documentation we provided is enough for arrest warrants." He paused. "Nathan is being transferred to federal custody this afternoon." Elena nodded. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and slid an envelope across the table. She didn't pick it up. "What is that?" she said, though she already knew. "A transfer," he said, "to an account in your name, $500,000. He paused. "I know it's not enough. There isn't an amount that's enough." "But no," Elena said. He stopped. "I'm not taking it," she said. "Elena, I told you last night I wasn't working for you," she said. "I was clearing my name, which I've done. The money doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change what I know about this place or this organization. And it doesn't undo the fact that your system made it possible for Nathan to choose me as a scapegoat in the first place." She pushed the envelope back across the table. "Money is how you've handled everything that became inconvenient. I'm not going to be handled." Adrian looked at the envelope. He didn't pick it up either. He looked at her. "Then what do you want?" he asked. And the question was genuine. She could hear it, the specific quality of a man who was asking, because he didn't know and needed to, which was different from a man who was asking, because he thought it was the right thing to say. Elena had been thinking about this, not since the morning, longer than that. She had been thinking about it in the quiet part of her mind that kept running even when the crisis was loudest, the part that had been asking her since the night before. "If you get through this, what do you want it to mean?" "The staff in this estate," she said. "The people who spent years walking quietly because that's what the job required. Helen, who gave me the worst assignments because she was afraid that anything good would be taken away from her. Marcus, who left the balcony when Nathan told him to because he'd been trained his whole career to comply. The workers in the neighborhoods around this operation who have been absorbing the cost of what this organization does. She looked at him steadily. I want accountability, real accountability, not a check and a non-disclosure agreement. Adrian was very still. I want the federal investigation to have access to everything, she continued. Not just Nathan's records. Everything, the shipping operation, the port agreements, the financial structures, all of it. That will end things, Adrian said quietly. Yes, she said, it will. It may mean prison time. For me. I know what it may mean, she said. And I'm telling you that the alternative is that you pay me to go away and nothing changes, and the next person who decides to use the invisible worker as scaffolding for their plan gets to do it because the conditions for it still exist. She paused. You asked what I want. I want those conditions to stop existing. The silence between them stretched to the length of something real. Adrian picked up the envelope and put it back in his pocket. If I cooperate fully, he said slowly, I lose the organization. The legitimate business goes under federal oversight. The rest, he stopped. I lose everything I've built for 20 years. You lose the structure, Elena said. That's not the same as everything. He looked at her. You have people who are loyal to you, she said. Not Nathan's kind of loyalty, the actual kind. Gabriel. Some of the staff. People who've worked for you for years and made choices based on what they thought you were. She paused. You have the ability to build something different. You've been paying college tuition for employees' kids. You've been funding neighborhood clinics. You already know how to do something that isn't this. You just haven't had a reason to choose it over what was easier. You make it sound simple, he said. It's not simple, she said. But the fact that it's hard doesn't make it wrong. He looked at the table. She could see him working through it, not calculating exactly, but something more internal than calculation. The process of a person deciding who they are going to be on the other side of a moment that has changed too much for the old answer to still fit. The staff, he said. The ones who knew things and didn't come forward because they were afraid. Witnesses, Elena said. Not liabilities. I'll make that clear to the investigators. And I want it in writing, she said. Not because I don't believe you. Because words in this family have historically depended on who was saying them to whom. Writing doesn't have that problem. He looked at her, and the expression she had been learning to read all morning shifted into something she hadn't seen on him before. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. The look of a person encountering someone who is consistently, reliably, exhaustingly honest, and has decided they respect it even though it costs them something every single time. All right, he said. The cooperation agreement between Adrian Moretti and the federal investigation was signed at 2:37 that afternoon. Elena wasn't in the room when it was signed. She was in the kitchen, the actual kitchen, the service kitchen on the ground floor, sitting at the staff table with Helen, who had come in after the morning shift and found the estate in a state she could not have prepared for. Helen sat across from Elena with a cup of tea going cold between her hands and the expressions of someone who had been carrying a secret that was too large for one person and had finally been told they could put it down. I knew, Helen said. It came out small and ashamed and also relieved. Not everything. I didn't know about the assassination plan. I swear I didn't know that. But I knew there was something with the maintenance logs. I saw an order go through 3 weeks ago that didn't make sense. She stopped. You didn't report it, Elena said. I was afraid, Helen said simply. I've worked here for 11 years. My daughter starts college in the fall. I was afraid. Elena looked at her. She thought about all the things she could say about the obligation to speak, about what silence costs, and she chose not to say any of them because Helen already knew them, had known them for 3 weeks, while she carried the weight of knowing and not saying, and adding more weight to a person who was already bent under it wasn't the same as helping them stand up. You can tell the investigators now, Elena said. They'll treat you as a witness. Helen looked up. You made sure? Adrian agreed to it. It's in writing. Helen pressed her lips together. Her eyes got bright. Elena, she said. And then she stopped, because the word that came next, thank you, seemed too small for what she meant by it, and neither of them wanted to use a small word for a large thing. Tell the investigators what you saw, Elena said. That's all. Just tell them what you saw. Helen nodded. She picked up her tea and discovered it was cold and set it back down and didn't seem to mind. Marcus came in 20 minutes later, and then 2 of the grounds crew, and by mid-afternoon, the staff table had become the kind of quiet gathering that forms naturally in a house where something large has shifted, people drawn together by the need to understand what had changed and what it meant for them. telling each other what they had seen and known and stayed quiet about, the words coming out tentatively at first and then with more force as each person discovered that the room was safe for them. Elena stayed, not to manage it, not to direct it, just to be present, because she understood that sometimes the most useful thing you could do was stay in the room and let people know the room was real. Gabriel came and found her at 4 o'clock. "The cooperation agreement is signed," he said. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the gathered staff with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "Adrian wants to see you." She found Adrian in the main study, the same room where, 12 hours earlier, he had asked her to help him find the truth. The room looked the same. Everything about it looked the same. But the atmosphere of it was different in the way that a room is different after a significant thing has happened inside it, something in the air that wasn't visible but was present. He was standing at the window. She was starting to understand that the window was where he went to think. He turned when she came in. "It's done," he said. "Full cooperation. The federal team has everything." "Good," she said. "The shipping company goes under independent oversight immediately. The investigation will determine what the restructuring looks like." He paused. "My lawyers tell me the likely outcome includes significant fines, possible criminal exposure on 2 of the port operations. They're advising me to prepare for—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter what they're advising me. I've decided what I'm doing." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "Do you understand what you've cost me?" The question was not hostile. It was genuine, the question of someone who needed to say the thing out loud to a person who had the standing to hear it. "Yes," she said, "I think I do." "My lawyers think I'm insane," he said. "Gabriel thinks I'm making a decision in an emotional state that I'll regret when the dust settles." "What do you think?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I think I've spent 20 years building something on a foundation that required everyone around me to be afraid of me. And I think a woman who cleans my bathrooms looked at that foundation and told me the truth about it in a way that no one with any real interest in my approval has ever managed to do." He paused. "And I think if I pay her to go away and go back to what I was doing, I'll have learned nothing from the fact that I almost died on my own balcony last night." Elena said nothing. She let him have the space. "There are families," he said. "People who worked in the neighborhoods where the organization operated. Workers who were exploited. The port operations employed people under conditions." He stopped. "I knew." I didn't look directly at it, but I knew. He looked at her. "You said accountability." "Yes," she said. "I want to set up a compensation fund. From the lawful sale of property, several of the estate's holdings aren't connected to the federal investigation. They're legitimate real estate. The proceeds could fund, I don't know. I don't know what it should look like." "I do," Elena said. He looked at her. "Crisis training," she said, "for domestic workers. Hotel staff. Service workers. The people who are in the rooms where powerful things happen and who are never considered a factor until something goes wrong, and they're the most convenient person to blame." She paused. "Legal assistance. Employment support. A center where people can learn to recognize danger and have somewhere to go when they find it." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You've been thinking about this?" "Since about 3 in the morning," she admitted. "When I couldn't sleep and needed my mind to have somewhere useful to go." He almost laughed again. This time it lasted half a second longer before it disappeared. "You would run it," he said, "independently. No connection to the organization. No condition that it serves my interests or my reputation. Funded by the property sales," Elena said, "but yes, independently run. You don't get to call it the Adrian Moretti Community Center. You don't get a plaque. You don't get credit." "I wasn't going to ask for credit," he said. "People always ask for credit," she said, "even when they don't mean to. Make sure the legal structure prevents it." He nodded. She turned to go. She had been in this building for 22 hours, and she needed to go home and sleep and eat something that hadn't been assembled from a staff kitchen under crisis conditions. And she needed to sit in her own apartment and let the last 22 hours be real in the quiet way that things become real when you're alone with them. "Elena," Adrian said. She stopped. "What you said earlier, about survival without change being a delayed defeat." He paused. "Where did that come from?" She thought about it. "My father used to say that the most dangerous place to stand was exactly where you were standing when things went wrong. Because if you don't move, the same thing will happen again, just from a different angle." Adrian absorbed this. "He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was a stubborn man," she said. "He taught me to shoot and to see and to move, and he told me that the only thing that separated someone who survived from someone who didn't was the decision to keep paying attention." She paused. He would have found this entire situation extremely instructive. He died 3 years ago," she said, simply, not looking for comfort. "I'm sorry," Adrian said. and it came out without the professional gloss that covered most of what he said. Just the plain words plainly meant. "Thank you," she said. She walked out of the study and down the main stairs and through the entrance hall and out the front door of the Moretti estate, and the cold Lake Michigan air hit her face like something her body had been asking for since the previous night. She stood on the front steps and breathed. Across the lawn, the tree line where the shooter had positioned himself the night before was ordinary in the afternoon light, just trees. Bare-branched in November, the kind of trees you walked past 1,000 times without looking. She looked at them now. She looked at the exact space between the second and third oak from the left, where she had seen the reflection that had changed everything. She thought about her father teaching her to see. She thought about 6 years of dispatch calls and voices in the night, and the decision every single time to pick up the phone. She thought about Helen at the staff table saying, "I was afraid," and meaning it, and saying it anyway. She thought about Adrian Moretti's face when he signed the cooperation agreement, which she hadn't been in the room to see but could imagine clearly enough from what she knew of him. Now the face of a man who had looked at the cost and paid it anyway. None of it was simple. None of it was finished. The investigation would run for months. The compensation fund would take time to establish. The legal consequences for Adrian were uncertain and real. The staff of the estate faced a future that was genuinely unknown in ways that were frightening for people who had built their lives around the security of knowing what came next. And Elena Parker had a name on forged maintenance records that would need to be officially cleared. Had an apartment across the city that she'd left the previous morning expecting to come back to by evening. Had a life that was entirely her own, built piece by piece from the work she had done and the choices she had made, and that life was waiting for her on the other side of the train ride home. She was tired in a way that went to her bones. She noticed thinking about the training center, about what it would need, about who she would call first, about the emergency response protocols she had already begun adapting in her mind for the specific context of domestic workers and hotel staff, the people who moved through the spaces that power occupied, who saw everything, who were prepared for nothing. Her mind was already building it. Her father would have said, "That's how you know what you're supposed to do next." She pulled her phone from her pocket. 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. A text from her neighbor asking if she was okay, because apparently the news had mentioned the Moretti estate and there had been police. A voicemail from her supervisor at the dispatch center, which she would need to listen to and deal with in the morning. She called her neighbor first and told her she was fine. Then she started walking toward the gate. Behind her, the Moretti estate settled into the quiet of a place that had been through something large and was beginning slowly, with difficulty, one floor at a time, the long process of becoming something else. Elena didn't look back. She knew the way out. She'd learned it 3 months ago, walking those corridors in the quiet early hours when no one thought she was paying attention. She had been paying attention the whole time. That, in the end, was the thing that changed everything. She went back to work the following Monday, not to the Moretti estate, to the dispatch center on West Madison, where her supervisor had left 3 voicemails in 2 days, and where her headset was still in the 3rd drawer of her workstations, exactly where she had left it on the morning before everything changed. She walked in at 6:55, 5 minutes before her shift started, the same way she had walked in for 6 years, and she sat down and put her headset on and took her first call at 7:01. The caller was a 73-year-old woman named Dorothea, who had fallen in her kitchen and couldn't reach the phone on the counter and had been on the floor for 20 minutes before she managed to pull her emergency pendant. Elena talked to Dorothea for 4.5 minutes while the paramedics were dispatched, and she kept her voice calm and warm and specific. Dorothea exactly what was happening, exactly how long it would take, asking her whether she could move her left hand, telling her that was good, that was very good, keeping the line between them clear and real and present until the paramedics came through the door. When the call ended, Elena sat for a moment with her headset in her hands. This was the work. This had always been the work. The work of paying attention to the person on the other end of the line who was frightened and alone and needed someone to pick up. She put her headset back on and took the next call. The federal investigation ran for 7 months. Elena was interviewed 4 more times by Sandra Reeves and her team. Each interview was longer and more detailed than the last as the investigation expanded outward from Nathan Cross and Victor Hale into the broader network of port officials, contractors, and financial structures that had grown alongside the Moretti organization for over a decade. Each time, Elena sat across from Sandra Reeves and gave exactly what she had, Clear, accurate, unembellished information. On the fourth interview, Sandra set down her pen and said, most people in your position would have taken the money and signed the NDA. I know, Elena said. What made you different? Elena thought about it honestly. My father taught me that the most expensive thing you can do is accept a situation that costs other people what you weren't willing to pay yourself. She paused. The people in those neighborhoods didn't get offered $500,000 in a luxury apartment. They just got the cost. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote something. And Elena never found out what it was, but she didn't think it was related to the investigation. Nathan Cross pleaded guilty on 6 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and racketeering. The plea agreement came 8 months after his arrest, and when it was announced, Elena was in the middle of a training session at the community center and found out from a text message from Gabriel that read simply, 6, guilty, sentencing in March. She read the message, told the group she was working with to take a 5-minute break, stepped into the hallway, and stood there for a moment, letting the information be real. 6 counts. The man who had spent 14 months building a case against her with her own employee number, who had decided she was the safest person to sacrifice because no one would fight for her, was going to prison for the rest of his functional life. She thought about what she felt, honestly. She expected to feel triumphant or relieved or something with a clean shape she could point to. Instead, what she felt was quieter than that, a settling, like a weight that had been pressing on something for a long time finally being lifted, and underneath it just the ordinary ground of her own life, solid in hers. She went back into the training session. The Chicago Community Safety Center had opened its temporary location in February, 3 months after the night on the balcony. The permanent location in a renovated building on the south side, funded by the sale of 2 Moretti properties that had been released from federal hold after their clean title was established, opened in April. Elena had spent those months in the way she spent most things, methodically, early, paying attention to what the work actually required rather than what she had imagined it would require. She had been right that domestic workers and hotel staff needed crisis training adapted specifically for their context. She had been less right about some of the other details, and she had learned to adjust, because adjustment was the only honest response to being wrong. She built the curriculum herself, drawing on 6 years of dispatch protocols and the specific knowledge she had accumulated during 3 months of working invisibly inside the most powerful private residence in Chicago. She knew what it felt like to be in a room where something dangerous was happening and to have framework for identifying it except instinct. She built a framework. She also built a legal assistance partnership with 2 pro bono attorneys who agreed to take referrals from center participants, and an employment support component staffed by volunteers from the social work program at UIC. In a crisis line not a substitute for 911, she was careful to explain that every time, but a line where a domestic worker or hotel staff member who had seen something they didn't understand could talk to someone who would take them seriously. Helen called the crisis line the first week it was open. Elena answered it herself because she was still learning which hours needed full coverage and which hours were slower, and she happened to be in the office when the call came in at 9 in the evening. Elena? Helen's voice careful and a little uncertain, the voice of someone who was still learning, that careful and uncertain were allowed. Helen, Elena said. What's happening? There's a situation at my new job, Helen said. She had taken a position at a hotel in the Loop after the Moretti estate had been transferred to federal oversight. I saw something today and I didn't know who to call. Tell me what you saw, Elena said. Helen told her. It wasn't a dramatic situation, not a rifle scope in a tree line, not a forged maintenance record. It was smaller than that, and in some ways more important, a pattern of behavior by a senior manager that Helen recognized because she had spent 11 years learning to recognize the things that powerful people did when they thought the service staff wasn't paying attention. Elena listened to the whole thing. Then she said, "You were right to call. Here's what I think you should do." She talked with Helen for 40 minutes. When they hung up, Helen's situation hadn't resolved itself. It would take weeks to resolve. Through the right HR channels, with the support of the legal referral, Elena connected her to but Helen's voice on the phone at the end of those 40 minutes sounded different from the way it had sounded at the beginning. It sounded like a person who had been heard. Elena sat with the phone in her hand for a moment after the call ended and thought about the specific weight of that of being heard. How it wasn't the same as having your problem solved. How sometimes it mattered more. The training sessions filled up faster than Elena had expected. Word moved through the network she had underestimated the informal communication systems of domestic workers, hotel housekeepers, catering staff, the people who cleaned offices and staffed receptions and ticket trays at events where powerful things were decided. People who had always talked to each other, who had always shared information through channels that the people in charge had never bothered to map because they had never thought those channels mattered. Elena had once moved through those channels herself, invisible and paying attention. Now she was building something inside them. Adrian came to the center in May. He didn't announce it. He came on a Thursday afternoon wearing a dark coat, no security detail, and he sat in the back of a training session for 45 minutes without saying anything. Elena noticed him when she was about 20 minutes in, and she acknowledged him with a nod and kept going because the 12 people in front of her were more important than the one in the back of the room. And Adrian understood that she could tell from the small shift in his expression when she kept going without stopping to greet him. After the session, he stayed in his chair while the participants left and the room cleared. Elena came and sat down 2 chairs away from him. He had changed. It was visible in ways that were small and not small simultaneously. He was thinner. He had cut his hair shorter. He was wearing a watch she hadn't seen before, plain and inexpensive looking. His criminal empire was in federal receivership. His name was in every newspaper in Chicago and most of the national ones. His lawyers had negotiated an agreement that kept him out of prison in exchange for full cooperation and the forfeiture of most of his assets, a deal that was still controversial, that had people in the federal building arguing with each other about whether it was right, that Elena herself had complicated feelings about and had thought about carefully and had ultimately decided was the best available outcome from an imperfect set of options. He was not the man she had tackled on the balcony, or he was that man, but changed in the specific way that a landscape changes after something significant has passed through its same terrain, different surface. The session was good, he said. Thank you. The scenario you ran, the one about recognizing when a work order has been altered. I built that one myself, she said. I know, he said. And there was something in it, not quite humor, but the recognition between 2 people of a shared reference point. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm working with a small logistics firm. Legitimate operation, 6 employees. Nothing like. He stopped. How is that? She asked. Strange, he said. Small, quiet. He paused. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to tell me it's enough, he said. I know it's not enough. The people who were harmed don't get their years back because I run an honest logistics firm. I know that. Then why are you telling me, she said. He looked at the empty chairs in front of him. Because you're the only person I know who will tell me the truth about whether what I'm doing matters. Elena considered that. Then she said, it matters that you're doing it. It's not sufficient by itself. It matters that you're doing it. He nodded. It wasn't the answer he'd hoped for, she could tell, but it was the answer he'd come for, which were 2 different things. She thought about all the conversations she'd had with him in the months since November. Not many. They were not friends in any conventional sense. They were something stranger than friends, 2 people who had been inside the same extreme moment and had come out of it changed in ways that were real and ongoing. What they owed each other wasn't friendship. It was something closer to honesty, which was rarer and in some ways more demanding. The compensation fund has distributed to 43 families so far, he said. Gabriel sends me updates. The legal team is processing another 22 claims. I know, she said. The center helped 7 of those families with their documentation. He looked at her. You've been working with the claimants? Some of them need help understanding the process, she said simply. He was quiet again. Then he said, I went to see Nathan. She hadn't expected that. She kept her face even because her reaction was complicated and she needed a moment to sort it. When 2 weeks ago, before sentencing, he looked at his hands. I needed to say something to him in person. What did you say? I told him that I forgave him, Adrian said. Not because what he did was acceptable. Not because I understood it or because it made sense to me after everything, but because carrying it was going to be the thing that stopped me from doing what I'm trying to do. He paused. He didn't accept it. He told me I was performing for myself, not for him. He might be, Elena said. Adrian looked at her sharply. Forgiveness is complicated, she said. Sometimes it is for yourself. That doesn't make it worthless. It just makes it honest about what it is. He absorbed that. You didn't come here just to tell me about Nathan, she said. No, he admitted. Then why? He reached into his coat pocket and took out an envelope. Not the kind she had pushed back across the table in October, not a bank transfer. Nothing like that. An actual paper envelope, the old-fashioned kind. Sealed the building on Halsted, he said. The one the center has been renting as a second location. The lease comes up in September. I looked at the ownership structure. The property company that holds it is one of the ones the federal oversight is releasing back to private sale. Elena said nothing. She could see where this was going. I had my lawyer make an inquiry, Adrian said. The asking price is reasonable for the neighborhood. The building is structurally sound. It would be a permanent home for the center. He set the envelope on the chair between them. It's not from me. The money comes from the remainder of the property sale proceeds that are designated for the fund. It's clean money. Legally clean. The oversight board approved the allocation. He looked at her. But I wanted to bring it myself because I wanted to ask you directly whether you would accept it. Elena looked at the envelope. She thought about the 12 people in that training session this afternoon, a hotel housekeeper, 2 restaurant workers, a woman who cleaned offices in the Loop, a man who had been in catering for 20 years and had never once been taught that what he observed in the rooms he served had value. She thought about Helen's voice on the phone at 9 o'clock, learning to name what she had seen. She thought about the center needing a permanent home. She picked up the envelope. Tell the oversight board yes, she said. And tell your lawyer to make sure the deed has no conditions attached. The center is independent, no conditions, he said. I had that language reviewed 3 times. Good, she said. She set the envelope in her bag and stood up because there was still work to do before the end of the day, and she had learned over the course of a life built on paying attention that you didn't let gratitude turn into ceremony when there were things that still needed doing. Adrian, she said. He looked up at her. What you did, she said carefully. The cooperation, the document disclosure, the compensation fund. It doesn't restore what was taken. You know that. I've never told you otherwise. I know, he said. But it matters, she said. The 43 families who received compensation, that matters. The fact that Victor Hale is in federal prison and can't do to another worker what he was doing at the port, that matters. The fact that Nathan Cross cannot choose another invisible person to build his next plan on, that matters. She paused. Accountability is not the same as redemption, she said. I don't think redemption is really a thing that gets completed. I think it's a direction you move in. And you are moving in it. That counts. Adrian Moretti looked at her with the expression she had first seen on a cold balcony in November, when he had looked directly at the woman everyone else had ignored, and understood for the first time that he hadn't been seeing the room he was actually standing in. Thank you, he said, plain and real like the watch. Don't thank me, she said. Keep going. She picked up her bag and walked out of the training room and down the corridor and out through the center's front entrance into the November air, exactly 1 year, almost to the day, from the night everything had changed. The street was busy. People moved past her the way people move in cities, absorbed in their own trajectories, their own urgencies, the invisible internal weather of their own days. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let the city be real around her. She thought about her father. She thought about the training room she had just come from. She thought about the 43 families, and Helen's voice, and the building on Halsted with its reasonable asking price and its sound structure and its potential. She thought about a balcony and a reflection in the trees and the decision she had made in a second and a half that had started all of this. And she understood something she hadn't fully understood before, that the decision hadn't started on the balcony. The decision had started years earlier, every time she had chosen to pay attention when it would have been easier not to. Every dispatch call she had taken seriously. Every detail she had filed away. Every corridor she had learned, because knowledge, even knowledge no one thought mattered, was never wasted. The bullet had not been the turning point. That was what she had told him, and it was true. The turning point was every small decision that had come before, every moment she had chosen to see rather than look away, to speak rather than stay quiet, to stay in the room rather than walk out of it. That was what her father had given her. Not just the skill to recognize danger, the understanding that the most important preparation was not for the moment of crisis, but for all the ordinary moments before it, when you were just a person paying attention in a world that was mostly not paying attention back. She started walking. A year ago, she had been invisible in a room full of powerful people, and they had built their plans on the assumption that invisible meant irrelevant. They had been wrong about that in a way that had cost them everything. She was still the same person who had carried that tray. She was still the woman who cleaned bathrooms and took dispatch calls and knew which service door stuck in cold weather. She had not become something grand or glamorous or different from what she had always been. She had simply refused on a balcony in an operations room, across a table from a man with a $500,000 envelope, to be what other people's convenience required her to be. And that refusal, it turned out, was the most powerful thing in the room. Elena Parker walked toward the train stations with her bag over her shoulder, and her father's voice in her head, and a building on Halsted waiting to become something real, and the city moved around her the way it always had, indifferent, enormous, full of people carrying things that no one else could see. She saw them. She had always seen them, and she was just getting started. 1 year and 3 months after the night on the balcony, Elena Parker sat across from Adrian Moretti at a corner table in a small Vietnamese restaurant on Argyle Street that neither of them had been to before. It was not a date. She would not have called it a date. Adrian would not have called it a date either, because they had both learned separately, through different kinds of difficulty, that naming things prematurely was a way of forcing them into shapes they hadn't earned yet. It was dinner. Two people who had been through something together, sitting across from each other, eating pho in a place where no one knew their names. She had suggested it because she was tired of meeting in offices and training rooms and the formal spaces that their lives had organized around them since November. He had agreed immediately, which told her something about him that confirmed something she had already suspected. The restaurant was warm and loud in the comfortable way of places that are genuinely full rather than performatively busy. The soup was good, the tea was better. Outside Chicago in February was doing what Chicago in February always did, and neither of them mentioned it. Gabriel told me you turned down the consulting offer, Adrian said. The security firm, Elena said. It was a significant offer. I know what it was worth, she said, and I know what it would have cost me to take it. She looked at him over her tea. I spent 3 months being invisible inside your estate, and it changed my life. I don't intend to spend the next 3 years being visible inside someone else's security apparatus and let that changeify me instead. He nodded. He didn't push. She had noticed that about him over the past year, the way he had learned not to push. Not the passive way of someone who had given up, but the active way of someone who had decided that other people's boundaries were real and worth respecting. It was a different kind of man from the one she had tackled on the balcony, or the same man moving in the direction she had told him mattered. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that is only comfortable between people who have stopped needing to fill it. Then Adrian said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask," she said. "Have you ever been in love?" She looked at him. He met her gaze without flinching, which was also something new. The Adrian Moretti she had met in November had met everyone's gaze as a form of dominance. This was different. This was just presence. "Yes," she said. "What happened?" "He was a good man who wanted a simpler life than the one I was living," she said. "I don't hold it against him. I'm not a simple person. I don't move through the world quietly unless I choose to. And even then, I'm paying attention in ways that make some people uncomfortable." She paused. He needed someone who would let him be the one paying attention. I couldn't do that. Adrian was quiet for a moment. "And since then?" "Since then," Elena said, "I've been building things. The center, the curriculum, the crisis line." She set down her cup. "I haven't been lonely. I want to be honest about that, because I think there's a version of this conversation where I'm supposed to say I've been waiting, and that would not be true." He almost smiled. "I wasn't expecting you to say you were waiting." "Good. I've been thinking," he said, "about what love actually is. Since Nathan. Since all of it." He was choosing his words carefully, not because he was performing care, but because the thing he was trying to say was genuinely difficult to say accurately, and accuracy mattered to him now in a way it hadn't always. "I built my whole life on a version of loyalty that I called love, but was actually something else. Something that looked like love from the outside and felt like love from the inside, but required everyone around me to be smaller than they were." Elena listened. "The people who worked for me," he said, "I thought I was protecting them. I thought the fear was a byproduct, not a feature. I told myself that the system was just how things worked, that everyone in my world understood the rules, that it was a kind of care. I kept them employed. I paid for their kids' college. I sent flowers when their parents died." He paused. "But what I was actually doing was keeping them in a condition where they needed me, not because they chose to need me. Because I had structured their world so that the cost of not needing me was too high." Elena said, "That's not love." "No," he said. "I know that now. What is it?" she asked, not rhetorically. She was genuinely asking him what he had concluded, because she was interested in what he had figured out, because that was one of the things she had learned about herself in the last year, that she was genuinely interested in how people thought, especially people who had been forced by circumstances to think harder than they'd planned to. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. Outside, the snow had started again, soft and steady against the restaurant window. "Control dressed in generosity," he said. "That's what it was. I gave people things they needed, but I gave them in ways that made it impossible for them to leave. And I called that taking care of them. But you can't actually take care of someone whose options you've removed. You can only manage them, he looked at her. Real care requires the other person to be free. If they're not free to leave, you're not caring for them. You're just holding them. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my father loved my mother that way, the real way. Adrian looked at her, listening. She was a difficult person, Elena said. Stubborn, opinionated, not interested in being managed. She changed her mind about things all the time, and she never apologized for it. He could have found someone easier. He chose to love her specifically, not in spite of who she was, but including who she was. All the inconvenient parts. She paused. He used to say that love without freedom is just a nicer word for fear. That if you love someone, you have to be willing to love the version of them that chooses something other than you. Because if you can only love them when they're choosing you, you don't actually love them. You love the way they make you feel. The restaurant noise moved around them, warm and indifferent. That's the hardest version, Adrian said. Yes, Elena said, it is. Because it requires you to hold something without gripping it. And most people, Elena said, when they feel afraid of losing something, grip harder. And the gripping is what destroys it. He looked at her with an expression she recognized now, the one that meant he was doing the internal work of taking something in rather than deflecting it. She had learned to read the difference in the last year. It was a small difference. It mattered enormously. I gripped everything, he said. I know, she said. And it was working in the sense that nothing left. But nothing was really free either. And eventually the thing you grip so hard either breaks or it finds a way out while you're sleeping. She paused. Nathan was the thing you gripped while it was quietly becoming something else. The truth of that landed between them without drama. The thing I keep coming back to, Adrian said, is how much of what I called loyalty was just fear that had been rebranded. My people were loyal to me the way someone is loyal to a cliff edge, not because they chose it, but because the alternative was the fall. He looked at his hands. And I mistook the absence of leaving for the presence of love. Elena said, most people do. It's easier to measure than the real thing. What is the real thing, he asked. How do you measure it? She thought about this seriously, the way she took all serious questions. You can't measure it, she said. That's part of the point. The real thing doesn't have a metric. It doesn't tally up favors given and received. It doesn't keep a ledger, she paused. I think the real thing is you see someone clearly, not the version of them that's useful to you, not the version that reflects well on you, not the version you've decided they are based on who you need them to be. You see them as they actually are, including the parts that cost you something, and you choose to stay present with that. Seeing without needing to change what you see, Adrian said. Yes, she said. And being willing to be seen the same way in return, without armor, without management. She looked at him directly. That's the terrifying part, the being seen. He held her gaze. I've never been good at that. I know, she said. You're better at it than you were. He absorbed that. Is that enough? I don't know yet, she said. I'm telling you the truth. And the truth was that she didn't know. The truth was that what existed between them was real and new and had not yet been tested by the long, ordinary stretch of time that tested everything, the months and years of daily life that were not crises and not dramatic turning points, but just the slow, unglamorous work of being present with another person's full reality day after day without the urgency of a sniper's bullet or a 14-month conspiracy to make the choice feel clear. The truth was that Elena Parker had spent her whole life paying attention, and what she was paying attention to right now was a man who had done something genuinely hard, who had looked at the cost of changing and paid it, and who was sitting across from her in a Vietnamese restaurant in February, asking her real questions and accepting real answers and not flinching from either. That was not nothing. It was in fact the beginning of everything that mattered. I want to tell you something, Adrian said. He said it the way he had learned to say things that were true without the professional register, without the management, just the plain words finding their way out. I'm not asking you for anything right now. I want to be clear about that. I'm not offering you a life inside mine. I know you wouldn't want that, and I wouldn't offer it even if you would. Good, she said. But I find that I want to know how you are, he said. Not as information, not because it's useful to me. Just because you are someone I think about when I'm trying to understand what I'm doing and why, and I would like the chance to keep thinking about that in proximity to the actual person. He paused. That's probably the most honest thing I've ever said to a woman. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, it's a start. And she meant it, she genuinely meant it as the beginning of something rather than a polite deflection. And she could tell from the small shift in his expression that he understood the difference and that he was going to hold that beginning carefully rather than gripping it, and that he had learned the hard way, the only real way, that some things only stay if you give them room to choose to. They finished their dinner. They walked out into the Chicago February together, not touching, not pretending the cold wasn't cold. At the corner, she went left and he went right, and they said goodbye the way two people say goodbye when they have learned that goodbyes don't have to be permanent to be real. She walked to the train. She thought about her father. She thought about her mother, stubborn and free and fully loved. She thought about the center on the south side, where 12 people had sat in chairs that afternoon, learning to see what was already there. She thought about the night on the balcony and the reflection in the trees and the decision that had started everything. And she understood again what she had understood then and what she kept understanding in new ways each time life gave her the chance, that the most powerful thing you could do in a world that wanted you invisible was to see clearly, speak honestly, and refuse absolutely and without apology to be what anyone else's fear required you to be. Love, her father had told her once, was just that, but turned toward another person. The willingness to see them clearly. The courage to let them see you. And the understanding that real love never needed you to make yourself smaller to survive it. That was the lesson the balcony had taught. That was what the bullet had not been able to end. And Elena Parker, walking into the Chicago winter with her eyes open and her hands steady, carried it forward for the families in the compensation fund, for Helen learning to speak, for the 12 people in those training chairs, for the man walking in the other direction, learning to hold without gripping, for her father who had given her the eyes to see it, for herself who had always been worth seeing.